This is Ethan Calloway, broadcasting on emergency frequency 97.3 from the abandoned radio tower on Thornfield Ridge. If you're receiving this transmission, turn around and leave these mountains immediately. What I'm about to tell you will sound like the ravings of a madman, but I swear on my father's grave that every word is truth. 3 days ago, I was a park ranger who believed monsters existed only in children's stories. Tonight, I'm the last human standing in a county overrun by creatures that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares. It began when Marcus Denvers, my partner for 6 years, went missing during his evening patrol near Black Creek Falls. We found him at sunrise on October 15th, collapsed beneath the old stone bridge where local folklore claims the devil himself once walked. Marcus was alive but barely recognizable, his uniform torn to shreds and his body bearing wounds that defied explanation. Deep gashes ran across his chest and arms, but they weren't clean cuts from claws or teeth. These marks looked like something had tried to tear him apart with bare hands, leaving ragged tears that wept blood in patterns too deliberate to be random. Marcus kept mumbling about yellow eyes that glowed like lanterns in the darkness, watching him from the tree line while he checked the campsites near Devil's Backbone. He described something that walked upright like a man but moved with the fluid grace of a predator, circling his position for what felt like hours before finally attacking. The thing spoke to him, Marcus claimed, calling his name in a voice that sounded almost human, but carried an undertone that made his skin crawl. When he tried to radio for help, his equipment failed completely, leaving him alone with whatever hunted him through the forest. My grandfather used to tell stories about the old country, tales his grandmother brought from the villages of Eastern Europe, where winter nights stretched longer than human endurance could bear. According to those ancient stories, werewolves were cursed souls doomed to transform under the full moon, their human consciousness trapped inside bodies driven by supernatural hunger. The curse spread through bites, turning ordinary people into savage beasts who retain just enough human memory to make their predation truly horrifying. Silver was the only thing that could harm them permanently, while normal weapons merely slowed them down until their supernatural healing restored any damage. The night after we brought Marcus to the county hospital, I stayed by his bedside hoping he might provide more details about his attacker. Around midnight, as October's full moon reached its peak, Marcus began experiencing what the doctors called severe muscle spasms. His body convulsed with such violence that the metal bed frame creaked and groaned under the stress. I watched in growing horror as his fingernails began growing longer and thicker, hardening into points sharp enough to scratch grooves in the steel railings. His breathing became labored and raspy, punctuated by sounds that reminded me disturbingly of animal growls. Marcus's transformation happened slowly at first, then accelerated beyond anything medical science could explain. His bones appeared to be stretching and reshaping themselves, causing his limbs to extend and his torso to broaden in ways that human anatomy shouldn't allow. Coarse dark hair began sprouting along his arms and face, growing so rapidly I could actually see it emerging from his pores. His teeth loosened and fell out one by one, replaced by fangs that pushed through his bleeding gums like ivory daggers. The most terrifying part was watching his eyes change from brown to a luminous yellow that seemed to glow with their own internal light. When Marcus finally broke free from his restraints, the metal bands snapped like paper chains. He moved with inhuman speed and strength, leaping from the hospital bed to the ceiling tiles above, before dropping down behind me with predatory silence. I barely escaped through the window as he began hunting through the hospital corridors, his movements no longer resembling anything human. By morning, 3 staff members had vanished without a trace, leaving only empty uniforms soaked in blood and scattered personal belongings that told the story of sudden, violent encounters. The official reports blamed the disappearances on equipment malfunctions and possible gas leaks, but I knew better. Marcus was out there somewhere, learning to use his new body, while driven by hunger that no human food could satisfy. I began finding evidence of his presence throughout the forest, signs that painted a picture of something far worse than any natural predator. Trees bore claw marks gouged so deep they reached the heartwood, left by something with strength beyond human capability. These weren't random scratches, but deliberate markings, as if the beast was claiming territory or leaving messages in a language I couldn't understand. The discovery of half-eaten deer carcasses confirmed my worst fears about what Marcus had become. These animals hadn't been killed by normal predators, but torn apart by something with both supernatural strength and human cunning. The bite marks were too large for any wolf, too organized for a bear, suggesting a predator that combined the worst aspects of human intelligence with animal savagery. What disturbed me most was how the remains were arranged, positioned in clearings like grotesque displays meant to be found and to spread terror among anyone brave enough to venture into the deep woods. Other people began reporting strange encounters in the days following Marcus's transformation. Hikers described hearing their names called from the darkness in voices that sounded like deceased relatives, luring them away from marked trails toward areas where search teams later found only torn clothing and bloodstains. Campers spoke of glowing eyes watching them from beyond their firelight, circling their sights throughout the night while making sounds that blended human speech with animal howls. Local farmers reported livestock disappearing from locked barns, taken by something strong enough to bend steel and clever enough to unlatch gates from the inside. The pattern became clear as more incidents occurred throughout Thornfield County. Whatever Marcus had become wasn't acting like a mindless beast, but rather like a predator that remembered human behavior well enough to exploit our weaknesses. It knew where people lived, understood their routines, and used that knowledge to maximize the terror of its hunting. Families would receive phone calls in the middle of the night, hearing familiar voices begging for help from locations where no living person should be able to call. When brave souls investigated these pleas, they found only evidence of violence and signs that something inhuman had been waiting for them to arrive. The curse was spreading faster than anyone realized, turning Thornfield County into a hunting ground where humans had become the prey. Each attack created the possibility of new transformations, as survivors bore bite wounds that would activate during the next full moon. I began documenting these cases, tracking the growing number of people who exhibited the same symptoms Marcus had shown before his change. They complained of increased appetite, heightened senses, and dreams filled with images of running through forests on 4 legs while chasing terrified victims through moonlit nights. Tonight marks exactly 1 week since Marcus's transformation, and I've counted at least 8 confirmed attacks throughout the county. The authorities refuse to acknowledge what's really happening, clinging to rational explanations that ignore the supernatural reality we're facing. They speak of rabid animals, deranged individuals, and isolated incidents, while the curse spreads like wildfire through our community. Each full moon brings new transformations. Each attack creates more potential werewolves, and each day brings us closer to the point where the beasts will outnumber the humans they hunt. As I broadcast this warning from my refuge on Thornfield Ridge, I can see lights moving through the forest below. Not flashlights or lanterns, but the yellow glow of predatory eyes reflecting moonlight as they search for my location. They've found my scent trail and are closing in with the patience of creatures who know that dawn is still hours away. The wind carries sounds that chill my blood, voices calling my name with Marcus's inflection, but twisted into something that no human throat could produce. My grandfather's stories never prepared me for the reality of facing supernatural evil, the crushing weight of knowing that everything I believed about the natural world was incomplete. The werewolves are real. They're here in Thornfield County, and they're transforming our neighbors into creatures driven by hunger that can never be satisfied. If you're listening to this transmission, spread the word to anyone who will believe. Avoid these mountains during the full moon. Arm yourselves with silver if you can find it, and pray that the curse doesn't spread beyond our borders before someone finds a way to stop it. This is Ethan Calloway, possibly broadcasting my final message as a human being. The devil's hour approaches, and I fear that by sunrise, Thornfield County will belong entirely to the beasts. This is Ethan Calloway transmitting from Mobile Unit 7, hidden in the ruins of the old Blackwood Mill, where thick stone walls mask my radio signature. It's been 4 days since my last broadcast, and the curse has spread beyond anything the old stories warned us about. What started with Marcus has become an epidemic of supernatural terror that's turning Thornfield County into a charnel house. The beasts multiply with each attack, and I've witnessed horrors that will haunt whatever remains of my sanity until the day I die. Jonah Whitfield managed to reach me through shortwave radio yesterday before his transmission cut to silence. He'd been guiding a family of campers to safety when the full moon rose over Cedar Lake, triggering transformations that destroyed everything human about the evening. The Hendricks family had seemed normal when they set up camp near the water's edge, unaware that one of them carried bite wounds from an encounter 3 weeks earlier. Jonah watched through his rifle scope as the father began convulsing around midnight, his body twisting and reshaping itself, while his wife and children screamed in terror. The transformation happened faster than anything I'd witnessed with Marcus, as if the curse was becoming more efficient with each new victim. The father's screams turned into howls that echoed across the lake like the cries of the damned, his human form dissolving into something that belonged in mankind's darkest nightmares. When the change completed, the beast that had once been a loving parent turned on his own family with hunger that knew no mercy or recognition. Jonah described watching the mother try to shield her children, begging the creature to remember their names, their birthdays, their shared memories of happiness. But werewolves remember only enough humanity to make their evil more complete. The beast played with its former family like a cat with wounded mice, driving them toward the lake where escape became impossible. One by one, it caught them in the shallows, its bite spreading the curse even as it fed on their terror. Jonah said the children's screams carried across the water for what felt like hours, gradually changing from human cries of fear into the howls of newborn monsters. By dawn, 4 werewolves prowled the shoreline where a loving family had planned to spend a peaceful weekend. Sheriff Carter Langston learned too late that conventional weapons are useless against the cursed. Carter had armed his remaining deputies with high-powered rifles and hollow-point ammunition, believing superior firepower could stop what they still thought were rabid animals. When they cornered one of the beasts in Miller's barn, Carter emptied a full magazine into its chest from 15 feet away. The bullet struck home with impacts that would have dropped any natural predator. But the werewolf simply paused to look down at the wounds before they began closing with supernatural speed. Carter's final radio message described watching the creature's flesh knit itself back together while his men reloaded their weapons in growing panic. The beast's yellow eyes never left his face as muscles reformed and skin sealed over the bullet holes, healing that defied every natural law Carter had believed governed the world. When the werewolf finally moved, it covered the distance between them faster than human reflexes could track. Carter's screams lasted only seconds before his radio went silent, leaving nothing but static and the distant sound of his patrol car being torn apart by claws that could rend steel. My grandfather's journals, hidden in our family's old cabin, provided the key to understanding why normal weapons failed so completely. According to European folklore passed down through generations of survivors, werewolves exist partly in our world and partly in supernatural realms where different rules apply. Lead bullets might tear their flesh, but their spirits remain anchored to immortal forces that restore any damage almost instantly. Only silver carries the purity needed to wound them permanently, cutting through both physical and spiritual defenses to inflict harm that cannot be healed. The search for silver became a desperate race against time as more people transformed with each passing night. I raided abandoned houses and empty churches, collecting wedding rings, family heirlooms, and religious artifacts that contained the precious metal. The old Lutheran church yielded a silver communion set that had served the community for over a century, while the defunct jewelry store downtown provided raw materials that could be melted and reformed into weapons. Each piece I gathered felt warm to the touch, as if the metal itself recognized its role in the coming battle against supernatural evil. Dylan Mercer had been trying to create silver ammunition in his garage workshop when the beasts found him during their nightly hunt. Dylan understood metallurgy well enough to melt down silver coins and jewelry, pouring the molten metal into molds he'd carved from soap bars. His workshop contained dozens of crude silver bullets, each one inscribed with religious symbols he'd hoped would enhance their effectiveness against creatures of darkness. But Dylan's work remained unfinished when claw marks on his garage door told the story of something that had torn through reinforced steel to reach him. The werewolves seemed drawn to silver like moths to flame, able to sense its presence from impossible distances. Every time I handled the metal, my skin would crawl with the sensation of being watched by hungry eyes. The beasts would appear at the edges of my vision, circling just beyond rifle range while I worked to fashion weapons that could harm them. They understood what I was doing and feared it enough to maintain their distance, but their patience felt infinite as they waited for opportunities to strike. Travis Harlow's family barricaded themselves in their farmhouse basement when the pack began hunting in coordinated groups. Travis had welded steel plates over every window and reinforced his doors with metal bars, creating what he believed was an impregnable fortress. But werewolves possess strength that makes mockery of human engineering, ripping through barriers that should have stopped tanks. Travis's final phone call described the sound of claws scraping against concrete as the beasts dug through his foundation. tunneling beneath his defenses like supernatural miners. The pack had learned to work together, using tactics that suggested intelligence far beyond animal cunning. Some would attack the front of a building, while others circled to the rear, driving terrified families toward escape routes where more werewolves waited in ambush. They communicated through howls that carried information across miles of wilderness, coordinating attacks that struck multiple locations simultaneously. The beasts had begun thinking like a military unit while retaining the savage hunger that made them perfect killing machines. Father Michael at St. Catherine's Church tried to provide sanctuary for survivors who believed holy ground might offer protection from the cursed. The old priest had blessed silver crosses and crucifixes, hoping religious faith could strengthen the metal's power against supernatural evil. For 3 nights, the werewolves circled the church without attacking, their howls echoing off the stone walls, while families huddled inside and prayed for deliverance. But on the 4th night, when the moon reached its fullest glory, even consecrated ground couldn't hold back their hunger. The beasts came through the stained glass windows like avenging demons, their massive forms silhouetted against colored glass that depicted saints and angels. Father Michael stood his ground with a silver cross held high, speaking Latin prayers that had protected the faithful for centuries. But werewolves are creatures of pre-Christian darkness, immune to spiritual weapons that came after their curse was born. The priest's screams joined those of his parishioners as the sanctuary became a slaughterhouse, where faith provided no shield against supernatural wrath. I found the church the next morning, its interior painted with evidence of violence that would haunt my dreams forever. Silver artifacts lay scattered across blood-soaked pews, their surfaces tarnished black where werewolf flesh had touched them. The blessed metal had indeed harmed the beasts, leaving burn marks on wooden surfaces where they dropped contaminated silver while feeding. But there hadn't been enough silver or enough time to save the people who trusted in protection that existed only in stories and prayers. Miles Radford, my own brother, called me on his cell phone 2 nights ago with desperation that cut through static and distance. Miles had been bitten during a camping trip near Wolf Creek, where he tried to help what he thought was an injured hiker. The wound on his shoulder burned like acid, he said, and strange dreams filled his sleep with images of running through forests on legs that weren't human. Miles begged me to find him and end his life before the next full moon triggered his transformation. The curse was spreading faster than I could track, turning friends and neighbors into enemies that hunted their former loved ones with supernatural persistence. Each attack created the potential for more werewolves, and each full moon brought new transformations that swelled the pack's numbers. I began to understand that silver weapons alone wouldn't be enough to stop the epidemic. The curse had to be cut off at its source before every human in Thornfield County joined the howling masses that prowled our forests. Tonight I can hear them calling to each other across the valleys, their voices carrying messages in a language that bypasses human understanding and speaks directly to primal fears. The pack grows larger with each passing hour, and their confidence increases as they realize no conventional force can stop their expansion. They're learning to be patient, to let terror spread through survivors before striking at moments of maximum despair. This is Ethan Calloway, still human, but for how much longer I cannot say. The silver burns my hands as I work to fashion weapons that might turn the tide, but time runs short and the beasts grow bolder. If you hear this transmission, remember that only silver can harm them permanently, and that the curse spreads through every bite they inflict on the living. This is Ethan Calloway broadcasting from the bell tower of St. Catherine's Church, where the stone walls still bear claw marks from the massacre 3 nights ago. The werewolves have stopped their random attacks and begun hunting as a coordinated pack, led by something that was once Father Grant Holloway, but has become an abomination that blasphemes everything sacred about human existence. What I'm witnessing defies not just natural law, but moral understanding, as the curse transforms our community's spiritual leader into a monster that leads the damned in their harvest of the living. Grant's transformation began 2 weeks ago when he attempted to perform last rites for one of the early victims. The dying man had been mauled near Devil's Creek, his wounds festering with supernatural infection that spread through contact with blessed hands. Grant never told anyone about the bite he received while administering final sacraments, believing his faith would protect him from any earthly curse. But werewolf evil predates Christianity by millennia, and divine grace offers no shield against darkness that walked the earth when angels still sang in perfect harmony. The night Grant transformed, his screams echoed through the church like the cries of souls tumbling into hell. I found evidence of his change the next morning when I discovered his clerical robes shredded beyond recognition, the fabric stained with blood and scattered across the altar like a mockery of everything he'd once held sacred. His silver cross lay melted against the marble steps, the precious metal fused into grotesque shapes that hurt to look at directly. But most disturbing was the way his personal Bible had been torn apart, its pages arranged in patterns that resembled the claw marks I'd been finding throughout the forest. What emerged from Grant's transformation wasn't just another werewolf, but something that retained enough human intelligence to corrupt everything good about his former nature. This creature remembered his role as spiritual leader and twisted that authority into commands that gathered the scattered beasts into a unified hunting force. Grant's inhuman howls carried undertones of sermon cadences, as if he was preaching dark gospels to congregations of the damned. The other werewolves responded to his calls with reverence that suggested supernatural hierarchy beyond simple pack behavior. Dr. Dylan Mercer had been documenting the spread of the curse when Grant's pack surrounded his clinic during the first coordinated hunt. Dylan's research notes, found scattered around his gutted office, described how the werewolves had evolved beyond individual killing machines into something resembling a military unit. They approached his building from multiple directions simultaneously, cutting off escape routes while maintaining perfect silence until the moment they struck. Dylan's final entry spoke of hearing human voices mixed with animal growls, as if the beasts were discussing strategy in languages that blended human speech with supernatural communication. The pack's first major assault targeted the Miller farmhouse, where 3 families had barricaded themselves with enough food and ammunition to last several weeks. The Millers, the Sandersons, and the Kowalskis had reinforced every window and door with steel plates, creating what they believed was an impregnable fortress. But werewolves don't think like human attackers, and their supernatural strength makes conventional defenses meaningless. Grant led the assault personally, his transformed voice calling out the names of everyone inside, while his pack positioned themselves for maximum psychological impact. The siege lasted from sunset until dawn, with the werewolves taking turns howling the names of family members who had died in previous attacks, They mimicked the voices of dead children calling for their parents, deceased spouses begging for help, and elderly relatives pleading to be let inside. The psychological warfare broke down the defenders' resolve more effectively than any physical assault, as grief and hope warred with rational fear. One by one, the families began opening doors to voices they recognized, only to find monsters wearing the memories of their loved ones like masks. Travis Harlow's military experience couldn't prepare him for enemies that combined supernatural abilities with human cunning. Travis had served 3 tours overseas and understood urban warfare better than anyone in Thornfield County, but werewolves fight by rules that no military academy teaches. They moved through solid walls like phantoms, appeared in locked rooms without breaking down doors, and communicated across impossible distances without radios or signals. Travis's final transmission described watching his own reflection move independently in a mirror, reaching out of the glass to grab him with claws that felt cold as winter graves. The pack began using the old mine shafts beneath Thornfield as their base of operations, turning the abandoned tunnels into a labyrinth where human prisoners could be stored alive until feeding time. Survivors who escaped these underground chambers described hearing constant howling that echoed through the darkness, as if dozens of werewolves were singing hymns to whatever dark forces had created their curse. The sound drove some escapees completely mad, their minds shattered by exposure to supernatural harmonies that human consciousness wasn't designed to process. Nolan Beckett, barely 12 years old, became the pack's messenger after surviving an attack that should have killed him outright. The boy appeared at survivor camps with bite marks that glowed silver in moonlight, speaking prophecies in Grant's voice while his own eyes reflected yellow light like tiny suns. Nolan would describe the pack's growing numbers with mathematical precision that no child should possess, counting victims and predicting future attacks with accuracy that suggested supernatural knowledge. When adults tried to restrain him for everyone's safety, the boy would simply vanish into shadows that seemed deeper than natural darkness allowed. The werewolves began staging elaborate hunts that resembled twisted celebrations more than simple feeding. They would surround entire neighborhoods and howl in harmonies that made windows shatter and dogs flee in terror, announcing their presence before beginning systematic elimination of every human within their chosen territory. Grant's corrupted religious background influenced these rituals, as the pack would arrange their victims in patterns that resembled altar sacrifices. The beasts took their time with each kill, savoring terror the way normal predators might savor fresh meat. Hunter Carver witnessed one of these ceremonial hunts when the pack surrounded the elementary school where 50 people had taken refuge. The werewolves didn't attack immediately, but spent hours circling the building while howling children's nursery rhymes in voices that blended human speech with animal sounds. They scratched messages into the school's brick walls using claws that left grooves deep enough to weaken the structure's integrity. Hunter described watching through classroom windows as the beasts played twisted games of hide and seek, appearing and disappearing among the playground equipment like demons enjoying their own private carnival. Owen Riker managed to escape from the mine tunnels after 3 days of captivity, bringing back intelligence about the pack's organization that chilled my blood. Owen described seeing Grant in his transformed state, a creature that stood nearly 8 feet tall, while retaining facial features recognizable from years of Sunday sermons. The beast wore fragments of his clerical collar like a crown, and spoke in languages that hurt to hear directly. Grant had created a hierarchy among the werewolves based on their former human roles, with teachers controlling smaller beasts, doctors managing the wounded, and law enforcement types serving as pack enforcers. The most terrifying aspect of Owen's report involved the pack's breeding program, as they kept certain humans alive specifically to spread the curse during full moon transformations. These prisoners were fed and cared for like livestock, their health maintained until lunar cycles triggered forced changes that added new members to the growing army. Grant performed mock religious ceremonies over these conversions, blessing new werewolves with rituals that perverted every sacred tradition into something obscene and unholy. Chase Donovan's disappearance during a scouting mission revealed the pack's expanding territory as they prepared for larger operations. Tonight, the pack gathers in the ruins of our town square, their howls creating harmonies that make the church bells ring despite having no one to pull their ropes. Grant stands among them like a blasphemous shepherd, leading a flock of the damned, his voice carrying across the valley with authority that once inspired faith, but now spreads only terror. They're preparing for something massive, a coordinated assault that will eliminate the last pockets of human resistance in Thornfield County. The werewolves have learned to work together with efficiency that surpasses anything natural evolution could produce. They share information instantaneously, coordinate attacks across vast distances, and adapt their tactics based on human defensive measures. What began as random killings has evolved into systematic extermination conducted by monsters that remember just enough humanity to make their evil more complete. Grant's corruption of religious authority has given them organization, purpose, and methodology that turns individual beasts into components of a supernatural war machine. This is Ethan Calloway, broadcasting from a sanctuary that feels less safe with each passing hour. The pack forms around us like a noose, tightening on the neck of human civilization, and I fear that dawn will find only monsters where once there lived people with hopes and dreams and love for one another. This is Ethan Calloway, transmitting from the abandoned mine shaft where I've been hiding since the pack overran our last stronghold 3 days ago. The bite wound on my left arm throbs with each heartbeat, marking me as one of the infected who will transform when the full moon rises tomorrow night. I can feel the curse spreading through my blood like liquid fire, changing me from the inside, while my human consciousness fights a losing battle against instincts that grow stronger with each passing hour. The infection began when I tried to rescue Hunter Carver's twin daughters from the elementary school where Grant's pack had cornered them during their systematic sweep of the town center. I thought my silver ammunition would give me an advantage, but werewolves move faster than human reflexes can track when they're defending territory they consider sacred. The beast that caught me had once been Mrs. Henderson, the kindergarten teacher who taught half the children in Thornfield County. She retained enough human memory to call me by name, while her claws raked across my arm, ensuring the curse would claim another victim. The transformation doesn't happen all at once, like the stories suggest, but creeps through your system in waves that build toward an inevitable crescendo of change. First comes the hunger, a gnawing emptiness that no amount of human food can satisfy. I find myself craving things that make my stomach turn, raw meat that smells like paradise, and living creatures whose heartbeats call to something dark awakening in my soul. Sleep brings dreams of running through forests on legs that feel more natural than my human limbs, chasing prey whose terror tastes sweeter than any earthly pleasure. My senses have begun sharpening beyond normal human limits, revealing a world of scents and sounds that existed hidden beneath what I thought was reality. I can smell fear from miles away, tracking the emotional states of survivors who believe themselves safely hidden in basements and storm cellars. Every human heartbeat echoes through the mountain valleys like thunder, calling to the predator that grows stronger inside me with each lunar cycle. The night sky pulses with energy that makes my bones ache and my muscles twitch in anticipation of changes that will remake me into something beyond human understanding. Derek Maddox contacted me through emergency radio frequency during his own transformation period, describing symptoms that matched my own deteriorating condition with terrifying accuracy. Derek had been bitten 2 weeks earlier while defending his family's cabin against a pack assault, and his descent into supernatural hunger provided a preview of my own inevitable fate. He spoke of feeling his human thoughts becoming clouded by predatory instincts that whispered promises of power and freedom from moral constraints that had always held him back. Derek's final coherent transmission came as he felt his bones beginning to stretch and reform, his voice distorting into something between human speech and animal growls. He described seeing the world through eyes that processed light differently, revealing heat signatures and movement patterns invisible to normal vision. The last thing Derek said was that the transformation felt like coming home after a lifetime of exile, as if his human form had been a disguise. He was finally allowed to shed in favor of his true nature. Victor Hanley had been documenting the curse's progression through infected individuals when his own bite wound began showing signs of supernatural contamination. Victor's medical background allowed him to track the changes with clinical detachment that made his reports particularly chilling. He described how the werewolf virus attacked the nervous system first, rewiring neural pathways to accommodate senses and instincts that human brains weren't designed to process. The physical transformation was merely the external manifestation of consciousness being rebuilt from the ground up. According to Victor's research, the curse worked differently in each victim based on their psychological makeup and resistance to change. Children transformed quickly because their minds remained flexible enough to accept radical alteration, while adults with strong moral foundations fought the process longer before succumbing to supernatural hunger. Religious individuals like Grant seemed to experience the most violent psychological breaks, as their faith systems collapsed under assault from forces that predated every human belief structure. The pack's expansion beyond Thornfield County became apparent when radio chatter from neighboring areas began reporting similar incidents to what we'd experienced during the early days of our outbreak. Families disappearing from locked homes, livestock found drained of blood, and witnesses describing yellow eyes watching from forest edges painted a picture of systematic infection spreading outward like ripples from a stone dropped in still water. The curse wasn't contained to our mountains, but moving through rural communities where people lived isolated from help. Colton Reeves managed to reach me from Millbrook County, 30 miles south of Thornfield, where he'd been tracking signs of werewolf activity for over a week. Colton described finding the same claw marks and bone arrangements that had marked the early stages of our own outbreak, suggesting the pack was either expanding its territory or teaching other infected individuals to create similar patterns. His transmission cut to static while he was describing enormous wolf prints found near children's playgrounds, prints that showed signs of bipedal movement, impossible for natural animals. The curse seemed to spread through methods beyond simple bite transmission, as people reported developing symptoms after finding werewolf artifacts or visiting locations where pack activities had occurred. Mason Drayton's family fell ill after discovering strange bone arrangements in their backyard, despite having no direct contact with any transformed individuals. Their symptoms progressed rapidly from nightmares and increased appetite to partial transformations that occurred during daylight hours, suggesting the curse could contaminate environments and objects touched by werewolf influence. Owen Riker escaped from the mine complex again, this time bringing intelligence about the pack's reproductive capabilities that explained their rapid expansion beyond what bite transmission alone could account for. Owen described witnessing ceremonies where werewolves could trigger spontaneous transformations in uninfected humans through rituals involving blood, soil from cursed ground, and incantations in that ancient language that bypassed conscious understanding. These mass conversions allowed the pack to create dozens of new members in a single night. The psychological warfare intensified as more people became infected, with transformed family members returning to their former homes to spread the curse among relatives who trusted them completely. Parents would find their missing children standing outside windows in the middle of the night, begging to be let inside while their yellow eyes reflected moonlight like tiny suns. Spouses would receive phone calls from partners who died weeks earlier, voices pleading for help from locations that led rescue teams into carefully prepared ambushes. Chase Donovan's patrol reports from the border regions described werewolf sign appearing simultaneously across a 100-mile radius, suggesting either impossible speed of movement or multiple packs working in coordination. Chase found evidence of communication networks that linked transformed individuals across vast distances, allowing them to share information and coordinate attacks beyond what normal pack behavior could explain. His final message spoke of hearing howls that seemed to come from underground, as if the curse was spreading through cave systems and mine tunnels. Tyler Callahan's medical research into the infection process revealed that the curse attacked different people at different rates based on factors that science couldn't explain. Some individuals transformed within hours of being bitten, while others fought the change for weeks before succumbing to supernatural alteration. Tyler theorized that spiritual resistance played a role in determining transformation speed, with people possessing strong connections to human love and morality, maintaining their original form longer than those driven primarily by selfish desires. Jared Monroe reported from his observation post near Devil's Peak that the werewolf population now outnumbered surviving humans by at least 3 to 1 throughout most of Thornfield County. The pack had learned to maintain human appearances during daylight hours, infiltrating survivor camps and evacuation convoys to identify targets for nighttime attacks. Jared's thermal imaging equipment revealed heat signatures that didn't match human physiology, suggesting the transformed retained enough supernatural nature to be detected through advanced surveillance methods. Scott Easton's communication with outside authorities confirmed that federal agencies were aware of the situation, but treating it as a biological weapons incident rather than supernatural outbreak. Military units positioned around the county border had orders to contain rather than investigate, meaning no help would come from conventional sources. Scott's final transmission described seeing aircraft spraying unidentified chemicals over the affected areas, apparently attempting to neutralize what they believed was an engineered pathogen. Tonight I can feel the transformation approaching as the full moon prepares to rise above the mountain peaks. My human thoughts grow cloudier with each passing hour, replaced by hunting instincts that promise satisfaction beyond anything my previous life could offer. The pack calls to me through the darkness, their howls carrying welcomes for a new brother who will soon join their eternal hunt. Tomorrow's dawn may find me changed beyond recognition. Another monster wearing familiar flesh while serving appetites that know no mercy or satisfaction. This is Ethan Calloway making what may be my final transmission as a member of the human race. The curse spreads like wildfire through blood and spirit alike, turning our loved ones into enemies while promising power to those willing to abandon everything that makes existence meaningful. This is Ethan Calloway broadcasting my final transmission as dawn breaks over Thornfield County, and the nightmare that began with Marcus Denvers reaches its inevitable conclusion. The transformation completed 3 hours ago when the full moon reached its zenith, changing me into something that walks the line between human consciousness and supernatural hunger. I can feel the pack calling through bonds that connect every cursed soul in these mountains, but somehow I've retained enough of my original self to warn you about what's coming and how it might be stopped. The change began at midnight when my bones started stretching and reforming with sounds like breaking branches in a winter storm. Every nerve in my body caught fire as muscles expanded beyond human limitations, and my senses exploded into ranges of perception that no mortal mind was designed to process. I could smell every human heartbeat within 20 miles, taste their terror on mountain winds, and hear their whispered prayers echoing through the valleys like music composed of pure desperation. But instead of losing myself to the hunger like every other victim, I found something unexpected within the curse itself. My grandfather's blood carries more than just folklore and stories passed down through generations of survivors. Our family line descends from the original pack that terrorized these mountains over a century ago, making me not just another victim, but something the old stories called a bridge walker, someone who could exist between human and werewolf consciousness without losing either completely. The bite didn't corrupt me, but awakened heritage that had been sleeping in my genetics since birth, allowing me to access werewolf abilities while maintaining human moral reasoning. Grant Holloway sensed my unique nature the moment my transformation completed, his howls calling across the county with recognition that carried both welcome and challenge. Through the supernatural connection that binds all werewolves, I could feel his presence like a cancerous growth in the network, poisoning every other transformed soul with corrupted religious fervor that turned natural predatory instincts into organized evil. Grant had become more than just the pack's alpha. He was a conduit through which something ancient and malevolent was reshaping the curse itself. The revelation came when I accessed the collective memories shared by every werewolf in the pack, experiencing their individual transformations and understanding how Grant's corruption had changed the fundamental nature of the curse. Traditional werewolves were solitary creatures driven by supernatural hunger but limited by lunar cycles and vulnerable to silver weapons. Grant's perverted spiritual authority had created something new, a networked consciousness that allowed coordinated action and rapid expansion beyond anything the old folklore described. Derek Maddox and Victor Hanley had been right about the curse attacking nervous systems, but they hadn't understood the full implications of those changes. The werewolf network functioned like a supernatural internet, allowing instant communication and shared experiences across unlimited distances. Every transformed individual became both transmitter and receiver in a system that turned isolated monsters into components of a vast organic machine designed for systematic elimination of human life. Grant served as the central processor, directing this network toward goals that transcended simple survival. The Pack's true purpose became clear when I accessed Grant's deepest memories and discovered the source of his transformation. The dying man who'd bitten him during last rites hadn't been randomly infected, but specifically chosen as a carrier for something that had been waiting decades for the right spiritual host. Grant's faith made him the perfect vessel for an entity that remembered when werewolves ruled the earth before human civilization arose, something that wanted to reclaim dominion over a world it considered rightfully its own. Brandon Hale's evacuation convoy had been allowed to escape not through luck or superior tactics, but because the Pack wanted survivors to carry tales of terror beyond Thornfield County. Every refugee became an unwitting recruiter, spreading fear that would weaken defenses in neighboring communities, while their traumatic experiences made them susceptible to supernatural influence from distances that defied natural law. The outbreak was designed to be a seed that would grow into regional catastrophe before expanding nationwide. Eric Dalton's communication equipment had been monitoring federal response to the crisis, revealing that military containment efforts were not only failing, but actively making the situation worse. Government scientists treating the outbreak as biological warfare were conducting experiments that strengthened rather than weakened the supernatural network, their technology somehow amplifying the connections between transformed individuals. The werewolves had been feeding information to these researchers through captured equipment, ensuring human countermeasures would enhance rather than combat their expansion. The discovery of Silver's true effectiveness came through accessing Pack memories of pain and terror associated with the blessed metal. Silver didn't just cause physical damage, but disrupted the supernatural network itself, severing connections between individual werewolves and the central consciousness that Grant controlled. A silver weapon driven into the Alpha's heart wouldn't just kill his physical form, but would cause cascading failure throughout the entire system, potentially freeing every transformed soul from the entity that had corrupted their curse. Ryan Chandler's hidden weapons cache in the old mill contained the silver bullets and blades I needed, but reaching them required fighting through Pack members who could sense my intentions. The supernatural network that gave werewolves their strength also made them vulnerable to deception from someone who understood how it functioned. I began broadcasting false memories and emotions through the system, convincing the Pack that I was completely under Grant's control while secretly planning his destruction. The final battle took place in the ruins of St. Catherine's Church, where Grant had been conducting ceremonies designed to expand the network beyond Thornfield County and into neighboring states. The corrupted priest had arranged silver artifacts from dozens of churches into patterns that somehow enhanced rather than hindered supernatural power, using blessed metal as components in rituals that perverted everything sacred about religious faith. Grant's transformation had progressed beyond anything I'd seen, turning him into something that retained human intelligence while gaining proportions that belonged in mankind's darkest nightmares. Fighting Grant required embracing the werewolf nature completely, while maintaining enough human consciousness to remember why the battle mattered. Our combat destroyed most of the church interior as supernatural strength met corrupted faith in conflicts that shattered stone and bent steel. Grant's knowledge of my thoughts through the network should have given him an insurmountable advantage, but his arrogance blinded him to the possibility that someone could use werewolf abilities in service of human values rather than supernatural hunger. The killing blow came when I drove a silver cross through Grant's chest while he was in mid-transformation, catching him between human and werewolf form when both aspects of his nature were vulnerable. The blessed metal burned through his supernatural flesh while disrupting the network connections that had given him power over every other transformed soul. Grant's death scream echoed through dimensions beyond human perception, as the entity controlling him was torn away from its earthly anchor and cast back into whatever darkness had spawned it. The network collapse happened instantly, severing supernatural connections that had bound hundreds of werewolves across multiple counties into a unified threat. Without Grant's corrupted influence holding them together, the transformed individuals reverted to traditional werewolf behavior, becoming solitary creatures driven by hunger, but lacking coordination or purpose beyond basic survival. Cole Barrett and Mitchell Crane managed to reach me through radio contact as the sun rose over what remained of Thornfield County. They reported that werewolf attacks had ceased throughout the region, with surviving pack members fleeing deeper into wilderness areas where they posed threats only to isolated travelers, foolish enough to venture into their territories during full moon periods. The outbreak was contained, but at a cost that measured in hundreds of lives lost, and a community destroyed beyond any hope of recovery. The curse still flows through my blood, marking me as something neither fully human nor completely monster. But the entity that had corrupted Grant's pack is gone, and the supernatural network lies in ruins. I've retained enough werewolf nature to track and eliminate any remaining threats, while keeping sufficient humanity to remember why such work matters. The old stories speak of guardians who walk between worlds, protecting humanity from supernatural forces that periodically arise to challenge our dominion over the earth. Federal authorities have classified the Thornfield incident as a contained biological attack, ensuring the truth will remain buried beneath official reports that satisfy no one while explaining nothing. The survivors will carry scars both physical and psychological for the rest of their lives. But they'll also carry knowledge that might prove crucial when similar outbreaks occur in other remote locations, where ancient evils wait for opportunities to reclaim territory they consider rightfully theirs. Tonight I begin my new role as guardian and hunter, using werewolf abilities to track supernatural threats while maintaining human values that give purpose to existence beyond mere survival. The network that Grant created may be destroyed, but the underlying curse remains dormant in bloodlines that stretch back generations, waiting for the right conditions to awaken and spread terror once again. Someone must watch for the signs and stand ready to pay whatever price is necessary to protect the innocent from forces they cannot comprehend. This is Ethan Calloway, no longer entirely human, but not lost to the darkness, beginning a hunt that will last until the day I die, or the world no longer needs protection from the things that prowl beyond the edges of civilization. Remember Thornfield County, remember the price of vigilance, and pray you never hear howls echoing through your own peaceful valleys when the moon rises full and hungry above sleeping towns. The transmission ends, but the watch continues forever.